Policy Institute and as chair of political science and international relations at Bay Atlantic University. The topic today is education, and we have the good fortune of having with us excellent people who will definitely provide some enlightenment to all of us on the pitfalls about access to education, which I really think this is really the problem that we're trying to address. Without taking time from our moderator and panelists, I would like to mention a couple of things which I hope are some relevance to this topic and maybe will be addressed later on in the panel. It used to be said about the United States that here in this country, anybody can do anything, right? This is the myth of America. No matter your circumstances, no matter your background, you can rise, you can do whatever you can, based on your, willingness to work hard and your potential and whatnot. Well, that's the myth. The reality is a lot more complicated than that, and quite frankly, not as glamorous, not as beautiful. We are in a situation, as far as I can tell, that in this country now, birth is destiny. In other words, the zip code where you were born is a very likely predictor of where you will end up as an adult, which is not at all what the American myth of anybody can do anything is about, which is, which brings us to the problem of education, in particular for those who are, kept coming to this world without the advantages of a rich family and a rich background and what have you. Public education was supposed to be the great equalizer, the ladder that anybody, any child, boy or girl, whatever gender and sexual orientation they may have, would be able to climb up and do whatever they could do. Well, that's not the case right now. And again, without further ado, let me turn it over to the real experts who can discuss all these things. And to our moderator, my good friend and colleague, Gina. So Gina, floor is yours. You can introduce the panel and run the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Bay Atlantic University and Global Policy Institute, where we have courageous conversations about racism, injustice, and inequality in the space of education and this amazing social world we're living in. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today. We have Dr. Kristen Broady, who is a policy director at the Brookings Institute. We have Dr. Fredric Kendrick, who is assistant professor of media and creative industries, and our very own, my good friend, amazing colleague, Mr. Tyler Cargill, who is our director of diversity and inclusion at Bay Atlantic University. So I just want to go ahead and get started. Typically I do an introduction, but for time's sake, I just want to go ahead and jump right into this topic. So I have a question for the panelists. What is your idea of your perspective of students and parents regarding the value of education as it relates to people's careers and lives during this pandemic?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? I just broke up for a second.
Absolutely. What is your perspective about the value of education as it relates to people's lives, careers, where we are right now?
So Gina, if you don't mind, can I start with that?
Absolutely. And the reason I'm asking this question, let me put some context, is that fall 2020 looks a little different, I think, how we all had envisioned. So I just wanted to get your perspective of where you are with in your profession and this in your personal and what you're hearing from family and friends. So please, you have the floor, Dr. Broady.
All right, so I am the policy director for the Hamilton Project at the Brookings Institution. Formerly, I was the dean of the College of Business at Dillard University in New Orleans. So I definitely have a good understanding of higher education. And one of the things that I can say is that earning a higher education degree, be it an associate, a bachelor's, master's, etc., increases lifetime earnings. It decreases lifetime stress. It provides more opportunities for young people and older people to get jobs in fields that they're interested in and be prepared for continued learning throughout their lifetime. So we know that higher education does these things. And the main thing is increasing lifetime earnings, or having the potential to do so.
Thank you. Next, Tyler, Dr. Kendrick.
I'm sure I'll jump into it. I think regarding the concept right now of education with COVID and everything, it's both showing to light both like the inequality between resources for individuals. From somewhere I grew up in the Midwest, it's not that big of a deal. It is one of those things where it's still like there are people I know that are teachers and faculty and staff members from where I went to high school are still having to have children and kids that like maybe have like meal plans and stuff where they're still getting those resources, but they're still going online and that. I also believe it's the time to actually show, how can I say this? The plans of one's institute. Does the faculty staff hire administration, know what to do, and are they able to transcribe their to-do plans and how to open with confidence? Because I think we saw, especially with Mississippi, I know when they reopened, I went there as an undergrad, that they, I believe, had to close the school after like 3 days because of like 100 students got sick. And they were just like, we didn't know what was happening. And it's just one of those things where, yes, you cannot plan to a certain level, but you can also, I like to say, plan for the worst, but hope for the best. So I think it's very much we're seeing like how it's affecting students. Like I said, the equality and inequality between students, but also what the Institute can actually do.
Thank you. Dr. Kendrick, we're waiting on you.
He needs his mic unmuted.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for the opportunity. I want to maybe give something a little colloquial, but I also believe common sense. And I agree with everything Dr. Broady said and Cargill said, but an observation in the Middle East and even here in America is that when the virus took place and then things started shutting down as a result of that, and then you couple that with demonstrations happening across the US and businesses, say downtown DC and other places, needing to shut down, I also saw the first to be let go or sent home are what one would term as non-essential workers. And usually non-essential workers are the ones that don't have an education. And then I looked into academia itself, and those are the one of the few places where I don't hear that people are being laid off or sent home. So that kind of demonstrates in one particular sector or field where education is very important, because you don't hear about teachers being fired or let go right now. In fact, they need teachers more than ever because of even people being at home. They need someone to teach these kids online. And then overseas in Abu Dhabi, what I saw is that, again, non-essential workers were the first to be let go and sent home, but those that had education were the ones that were able to find employment. And so I had a discussion not too long ago with a colleague in the industry, in the media industry, and there are people being rehired right now in America and largely in other places across the world too. But now we're really seeing the value of education, because in the past, people may have hired someone that may not have been the best qualified for the job, but was a placeholder for the job. Oh, we can train anyone. We can train them on the job. Now, when people are hiring, they are very specific about the education requirements because the budget is so thin now. I can't afford to train someone on the job. I need someone coming in with the education and ready to go. So when you think about the question you pose, I think this is demonstrative of the fact of how important higher education is, and education in itself, and how valuable it has been shown to be right now at this time. And I think that this is a harbinger perhaps for the future.
Thank you all for your response.
I like to comment off something what Dr. Kendrick just said.
Go ahead.
Regarding, I think, the fact of like letting people go and teachers, that's not completely true, because I know institutes that are private based are letting teachers go and are laying them off and are like furloughing them to the point where they're not coming back. And in addition to that, I know teachers that are in the public school system that they don't trust anything, and they're actively searching for jobs. Especially, I have a friend that teaches in Tennessee, and she's looking about moving back to Mississippi to teach, where they have a very no lack of students, or no lack of teachers. But then I also goes in the question, the amount of resources that a school has. So I do think it's happening, but I've never seen anything I haven't seen it like publicized as much. Just my personal opinion. I think it's kind of intriguing, because I do agree with you. The fact is, why do you want to train people? It's easy to have the placeholders. But I think COVID's created that fear where they're like, I'm going to get out of there and go somewhere where I still have the experience. I might have to adjust to how this environment works, but at least I'll know I'll be safe for a year or two.
So in relation to that, I'll give you an example. I went to the optometrist about 2 months ago, and we're having this conversation, and I'm asking him about employment. You know, hey, your office is bustling. I see people in here in the midst of COVID, and everything is boarded up in downtown DC. So what's going on? And he says, well, we are hiring. We're looking for about 2 people right now. And I said, well, how are you going to handle that? And what I'm referencing is the conversation he and I had and another media manager had, which is basically, this optometrist in his office now is saying, we can't just hire like we did before. See, before they may have said, okay, we need someone to serve as a receptionist, and they didn't care who they brought in. But because of COVID right now, they need someone who can serve as a receptionist, who has those skills, but also has some training, whether it be community college in optometry or something of that sort, so they can help out in the office when necessary. So I think that what we're seeing in the economy right now is a situation where there is some value or more value that's been placed on education in regards to a skill set for the people that you're bringing in. And it's all related to what I've been told, it's all related to shrinking budgets. You just don't have the opportunity to take a chance on people like you may have been before.
Thank you for that. Any other final comments regarding this question? Okay, great. I'd like to move forward with, because we are in this pandemic and COVID is affecting not just the K through 12 sector, as well as the higher education sector. There's also some individuals being impacted. K through 12, we've heard of some connectivity issues, some internet issues, the technology, the divide in terms of people, like I said, having access, just pure access, not even a connection, access. Quality of instruction is an issue for some students. And I mean students, refer to students, I talk about K through 12 and adult learners and or traditional students. What is your perception, idea of how that is going to impact these students? And do you think it's going to weaken the quality of the education? Because people are being challenged. There are individuals, yourself, Dr. Kendrick and Dr. Broady, you both are professors, but you may prefer, you know, the face-to-face classroom interaction versus now you're being forced to offer online instruction. So what's the balance of that for some individuals, as well as you have the parents who are involved, that may not necessarily be their forte. So how is this reshaping education going to impact everyone? Because this really is impacting everyone.
So I think where I want to start is if you compare PWIs, predominantly white institutions, to HBCUs, you would find that 43% of students at PWIs qualify for Pell Grants versus 75% at HBCUs. And so this is looking at income, right? Household income and the differences in the household income of HBCU students versus PWI students. So you can kind of extrapolate whether or not there are going to be enough computers at home, whether there's sufficient internet at home when you have 1 or 2 students and 1 or 2 working parents, all of whom need to use the internet and the computer in order to do work or go to school. So I talked to several presidents actually for my essay for this year, State of Black America, and one of the things that they said was that they were working with companies like Comcast, Xfinity, et cetera, in order to try to provide broadband for students at home. Schools also like Howard or Alabama A&M and others provided tablets or laptops for their students to use. I know that Dillard had loaners for them. So schools were thinking about these kinds of things for students that may not have had a computer or sufficient internet. so that their students wouldn't fall behind?
I think this is a big problem, so if you can say nothing else. For example, in DC public schools, recently it was announced that 30% of their 52,000 students lacked internet access or even computers at home. So you're dealing with a scenario that was outlined in one Washington Post article where basically people are borrowing money to add data plans to their mobile phones so their children can connect on the internet to do their homework. In the Alexandria, Virginia area, one of the things that I've seen is the public libraries all have signs outside saying, look, we're closed, but this is a Wi-Fi access point. And so you can pull up in the parking lot, which is what some people are doing, and doing their work there. But that's all dependent on if they have a laptop, if they have access to a parent or a neighbor or someone that can take them to the local library where they can sit there in this weather, which is okay for right now, but we've had some 90 and 100 plus days, and it's going to get cool in a little while. So it's a very interesting concern. And I think that right now there needs to be a lot of resources pushed towards it. And as Dr. Broady was saying, there are internet providers who are offering access by giving, say, a house that has internet essentials, which is what Comcast does, giving them higher speed internet versus the low speed that they had before. But there's a lot more room for improvement as well.
Thank you. Tyler?
I mean, I'm finding it fascinating because how I teach, I mean, I agree with both. I'm actually learning a lot more information than I was aware of. But I think my experience with teaching in this aspect in regarding of access is been on the private side where students, the big problem is that they don't have computers. They have phones, they have tablets, but they don't have computers. So for me, the problem has been not only have them have a stable internet connection, but is how are they actually producing the work? For example, where I'm a direct professor right now is I teach academic writing and research, but that involves writing. And some of them don't have computers, which I think it's more of a, yes, it is a resource-based stuff, but it's also, I'm not quite sure fully. I feel like it's a lot of people I've met and students I talked to were like, oh, we had tablets, we had computers at school, we didn't need them. So that's kind of where I'm at on this. I know where I have talked to and listened to people from other countries, kind of listening to how they're dealing with it. But otherwise, yeah, I'm rambling. Sorry, I was agreeing. I was really fascinated by the DC part. I didn't know about that.
I think you're spot on, and I know that KIP DC, which is a charter network in the Washington DC area, I know it had been reported not too long ago that they ordered Chromebooks for their students, and they did this over the summer so that they could have something. And they also sent Android tablets to their elementary students. So people, educational institutions are understanding that there's a void, there's a need, and there needs to be something done. But I just don't know if enough is being done. There's always somebody or someone that slips through the holes. You know, I have family members that I'm close to in the area that have access to Chromebooks from Alexandria City Public Schools. And there was an email sent out saying, hey, if you need one, come get one. But then there's a question about once they get the Chromebooks, the software that's being used, is it compatible with all of the new technology that has come out over the summer for video conferencing as we're doing now?
And also just the storing of data as well, because I mean, I love that. I love Chromebooks, but the problem is so much of it is internet. If you don't have an internet connection, it's extremely useless, in another opinion. I mean, I had to use one once, and I was kind of like on a research expedition, and it ended up being just completely useless without you get back. I used to do archaeology. We would go out, dig, and we're supposed to be recording there, but we're like, we have no internet connection. We have to hope this stuff will be saved, and you get back. So for the families and individuals that don't have an internet connection, you know, like you brought up the fact, Dr. Kendrick, about them going outside the library. That's great, but what happens when it gets to the colder weather, when these individuals now are going to be doing gas, and then you are having, well, also an environmental impact on that, but also now they're spending money on fuel.
Exactly. which can be perceived as a barrier. Real quick, there's an article or a study. It's called The Evolving Educational Landscape, which discusses societal shifts with respect to technology and how it has and is impacting the use of technology, formal instruction, creating the digital divide, excuse me, and how that overall is impacting 21st century learning requirements with respect to technology and internet. It's a good read. We're not going to talk about it, but it's just something that I think that as a community, we should probably just be, right now I think all hands on deck. How can we help these individuals? Like you, Dr. Kendrick said, it's going to get cold. We can't afford to sit out in the car because then, like I said, you're burning fuel. You have the proper clothing. There's just some barriers that I don't think people are even taking into consideration that are definitely going to exist as the fall is upon us and winter, and even allegedly this pandemic's supposed to get worse. So we shall see. I want to pivot real quick, if I may, to my next question. How do you think the current state of education is overcoming the historical inequalities in the education system? So I'm gonna give you a minute to think about that because I want to share something with the panel and those listening. Maybe if I can find it.
Well, if I may, I'll start. I think there's been great attempts, but there's so much inequality, so much imbalance that I just don't know what can be done. For example, I know of this new concept now that they have calling pod teaching, where a family will say, you know what, we're all at home, so the 6 or 7 of us are going to have our kids come to someone's house with their laptops, and they are going to all do their day-to-day classroom work here. They get online and there's 7 laptops here, 7 kids, and we'll hire someone, an intern from college or an educational intern student, someone that'll just walk up and down in my house to make sure these 7 kids are on the laptop. And I will pay a fee this week, and the kids are in my house, and next week Gina pays and the kids are in her house, and next week and so forth. And all that money collectively pays the tutor or whomever is walking around and helping. The problem with the scenario is there's a great majority of low-income people in America who can't do that. So we are now seeing a situation where even in COVID, where the government and private institutions and NGOs are doing everything they can to help keep everybody on the same playing field, I may make the decision because of my income level that I want to keep my kids safe from COVID. And I want to bring them here at the house and make sure they're still on track. But I'm also isolating a segment of the population that doesn't have that opportunity. And so what is the landscape going to look like educationally a year from now when we do go back to face-to-face, or 2 years from now that you've had your child in your home for a year or two being almost like private school at the house? And it's a hard situation to discuss, Gina, because the first thing someone's going to say is, well, that's my money. I do what I want to do with my money. And I do know of one family I saw on the internet, on television that was doing it in the Virginia area that said that, say if there were 7 slots, they agreed that 2 of them would be left open for low income people. And they would invite those people from the school district to sit in with them, and their monies subsidize those kids. But not everybody's doing that. So I think that this is an example of a problem that's getting ready to happen right now and is going to exacerbate very quickly.
I would agree. And real quick, before Tyler or Dr. Broady jumps in, there's an article that's on LinkedIn. Talks about work, when parenting and work collide. So for those of you who are parents, that balance is a real deal. As you suggested, Dr. Kendrick, you have a house full, your significant other, the children, if you're caring for elderly parents. So your escape probably was work. So now everyone is in the same space and place. But the article just talks about women and balancing everything, and men are having a very difficult time trying to manage the balance, the concept, because we all know that women do it very well. Not taking anything away from men, but the study shows, it's called the latest U.S. edition of LinkedIn. It's on LinkedIn. It's called a Workforce Confidence Index. Definitely if you get a chance, check it out. So some of their findings, parents say that their top 3 challenges keeping their children occupied, 67%, providing for their education, 59%, because the reality is some parents aren't educators. And to your point, Dr. Kendrick, that's why they send their kids to school, to be educated by, yourself and Dr. Broady's and Mr. Cargill's. And even though you were at a higher education level, there was still respect to just education as overall umbrella. And 53% or 53% of the children at home, women are more likely to find their focus on work gets disrupted, and men are more likely to be stressed, I stand corrected, about how to balance childcare duties with parenting. And that's a reality I don't think people are taking into consideration. If you are fortunate, if some of these children are fortunate, to even be in a two-parent household, which is probably a whole nother topic for a whole nother day, but just the reality.
Gina, I wanted to cut you off right there about that, because
please.
I have an interesting comment. A friend of mine and I were on the phone at the end of the last semester when we thought we were going to come back in August, and he says, you know what? When the next school year starts, we're not going to have any more disciplinary problems from these parents, because they're going to realize how tough it is having these kids at home. And he says, for a year, you're going to go to work and you're not going to have any parent-teacher conferences or anything. You send a note home saying, hey, he was acting bad in school. It's, yeah, we know we had them all. No. So, and we make a joke about that, but it's true. People are struggling teaching their own at home. And really, that's not their role as far as we know in America now. That's why we have teachers and school systems and all of that sort. And it's creating all kinds of problems, especially, as you say, if there is a single parent home, or even a traditional family with both parents there, but both are in such a scenario financially where they're having to work. A lot of people are dependent upon the school system having these young ones during the day. And that's why over the summer, you always see them having food campaigns, because the kids are dependent on school lunch and school breakfast. So we have a really, really interesting scenario now where a mother and father may be in the lower income bracket and both having to go to work, working at 8 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 6 or whatever. And the kids are there with a laptop or a cell phone and limited internet Wi-Fi access, having to get on by themselves and having to try to stay concentrated on their own, whereas there was a different role when they were in the classroom at a traditional face-to-face setting.
I would agree. Dr. Broady, Tyler, you want to jump in?
I mean, I like the comment because I think you worded this question in a way that I want to shift focus on other aspects of inequality. I work with several types of kids and teenagers that are gender nonconforming or trans individuals. And that's been an interesting thing that, for example, we have the Smile Center, the Smile program in DC, and they use it kind of like a community center for LGBTQ plus youth, where they are able to go after school or in situations where they can connect, they offer scholarships, all this stuff. And currently I was trying to talk to them, like, well, what's the steps they're going forward? How is the communication happening? So these individuals can connect over their gender or sexual orientation or whatever it could be, as a way to basically if the group I know I'd talk to, they would come, they would hang out, talk, and then they would do their homework together. And that social interaction is also something that is missing, I think, is a vital component, because especially with parents, hey, mom, dad, I love you, but I don't want to be in this room with you anymore. I need to deal with children, or I need to deal with my own kids or friends. I mean, we've all done that, especially, I'm guessing, when we all went to university, went back to visit our families, and we were for Christmas, and are like, I really should go do something else. I need out for a bit. So I think the term of inequality is, we're also, I think, looking at right now, obviously we went back to school, and the back to school season has started, where we're focusing a lot more on what's happened with COVID, which I think is very intriguing in, how do I say this? In the environment right now, because, we were talking about the racial and systematic racism in education, inequalities in that aspect. And now we're going to COVID and we're linking stuff back in. So it's one of those things where I think when you put the word inequality in there, it's just not easily defined, because everything's coming to a head right now. And it's just not the lack of, don't get me wrong, the technology is a big aspect for somebody that we all teach. But I think like everything is just starting to like come up right now and nobody quite has an answer of what to do.
Dr. Broady, do you have an answer? Thank you, Tyler. I think she has an answer.
Dr. Broady, I need help.
Dr.
Please.
Broady, we need help.
You know that I always have answers. So I'm thinking about this from a higher education perspective. And so I am eternally grateful to the UNCF. They gave Dillard and 3 other schools grants while I was there. Overall, it was $1.2 million. We got 300,000 of it. And so I'm going to go back just a little bit because my research has focused on race and jobs at risk of being automated. And so many of the jobs that were automatable, meaning that they were face-to-face jobs, are also the jobs that put people at risk of getting COVID. So we're thinking about cashiers or servers, all of these customer-facing jobs, the people who work at the post office that, you know, are there to help you when you need them. Many of those jobs can be done by a computer. And so one of the things that I started thinking about as a dean, as a department chair before, was what do we need to be doing to prepare students for jobs with the future of work with automation, so that we're not preparing them for jobs that are going to go away. And as I said, it overlaps with jobs that put people at risk of getting COVID. So what the UNCF did and what Dillard is doing now with this grant is working on combining soft skills with technical skills so that students are able to do the coding and the programming to program the computers and the machines that will continue to take over jobs that humans are doing, but also to have the soft skills of conflict negotiation, problem solving, being able to work on your own, possibly at home when no one else is there, not getting frustrated, things of that nature. So I think that those are some of the things that we need to do. And there need to be more public and private partnerships so that companies that are going to have these jobs can tell schools what students need to know and be able to do so that the schools can prepare them.
Excellent. Thank you. Tyler, did she answer your question?
She did, but I actually have another aspect. I like the idea how you said kind of like shaping and realizing, you know, working on your own and the different types of pacing a thing is. And I think that's one thing that I think just as a teacher right now and administration and everything on my side is seeing that what students can do in their speed and what has to be adjusted. So when I'm teaching English to non-English, oh my gosh, where English is not their first language, I realized like, okay, we're not in class. I have to supplement this with more group activity where they can work together. But then realizing like, just because that's happening like this, it's not going to work with this, another group because their technology is not well. What can I do with that? But I also think it's starting to let the school and especially like administration realize, you know, what is this worker speed? Like for me, I'm a horrible morning person. Like I am the most obnoxious morning person. Think Snow White with little animals flying. That's me. So like I wake up at 5 and get all my work done before 8. So if I'm in the afternoon, I'm like, well, I'll just grade papers or I can connect with students. So like I've learned that about myself and I've been suggesting to other teachers and it's been helping them. And then they've been sharing that with their like principals and everything for public schools. So I think there's also like this overreach through private, public, higher ed about things that like suggest, because we also in this COVID world are realizing what we can do well and what we can do right outside of a 9-to-5 work schedule or study schedule or I don't know, any variation of a traditional schedule.
Well, I'd want to piggyback off of what Dr. Broady talked about with the hard skills and soft skills. My area of expertise is media and communications. And when we first started seeing this COVID-19 on a national scale, the national organizations that to produce news were kicking people out of their studios and doing the newscast from their home. You would see the weather done in someone's backyard and so forth. I've always tried to embrace technology in my teaching and tell the students that we need to be able to shoot, write, and edit with the cell phone and be able to do all those things. But what I'm seeing at a university level, whether it be where I am or where my colleagues are, is that soft skills coupled with hard skills, this hybrid way of teaching, it's not something there's been a lot of interest in until you get funds, like Dr. Broady was saying, that allowed them to push that idea forward. And I don't know if that's endemic to academe, just being resistant to change or something, but we are in a new era right now, and we're dealing with a situation where many people are saying, I don't know if we'll go back to the way it used to be, so to speak, because we're getting ready to get into the winter time. COVID is projected to come back up. And then when that's out of the way, there's something else. So I think that there needs to be more situations like Dr. Broady mentioned, where there's finance to help train the students to know how to do both, because we're living in a new era right now.
I think it's more common than folks think, right? And so it may be called something different. So when I was at Alabama A&M, their College of Business has an ELO program, Experiential Learning. And so all students had to take managerial communication before they could take their internship, for instance. And again, this was everybody in the College of Business, right? Maybe some other areas had that as well. When I worked at Kentucky State University, they had a relationship with Toyota, the very large manufacturing plant there, where Toyota told Kentucky State, this is what students need to know and be able to do in order to get an internship with us. And so the students would go and do the internship, and upon graduation, they could go and get a master's at UK and then get a job at the Toyota plant, right? So that was another experiential learning, incorporating hard skills and soft skills. At Fort Valley State University and Atlanta Metropolitan State University, they worked with a group called Pacific Systems that did something similar, training students back then on Oracle and Hyperion. All of that was this sort of experiential learning, or a partnership with 2 or more institutions or a company or organizations like Europe that do this exact sort of thing. So I think it may not always be called, an incorporation of hard skills and soft skills, but that's what it is. And it doesn't always take a lot of money to do it. Sometimes it's a sharing of information between a company and a school. Sometimes there's funding, sometimes they're not. But when you're sharing information, that's a helpful thing.
Thank you. Any other comments, questions before I move on? Okay, so I want to have a discussion about this equity gap in education, higher ed. It's nothing new. It's definitely a historical, painstakingly embarrassing in the great USA. Real brief, if you just indulge, there's an article that was written in Inside Higher Education. It just basically talks about the pandemic has accelerated and worsened equity gaps in higher education and its connection to work with respect to new data, and also shows pathways to improving the connection. Clearly, it'd be no surprise that African Americans and Latinos and other historically underserved groups have been negatively impacted because of the pandemic. So their education and their ability to secure employment. So let me just read some of the comments that they surveyed a range of experts. Richard Reeves, Brookings Institute, calls the pandemic an equity gap in higher education an extraordinary collision of crisis that has further exposed multiple inequalities and inequities and inequalities. The whole U.S. political economy was a giant pre-existing condition, and COVID came along and exposed all of it. John King Jr., of the Education Trust and former U.S. Secretary of Education, the toll of this pandemic is, in a word, devastating, and is eroding students' academic success, their emotional well-being, and their financial finances. The pandemic's impact on the labor market, Black and Latino workers are more likely to have lost their jobs, while white and wealthier Americans are much more likely to be able to work from home. And as you said, Dr. Kendrick, and not be deemed essential frontline workers who are more likely to be exposed to the virus. So essentially, because of a person's color of skin or their educational attainment, they lose their employment, but then they're also sacrificed because they're non-essential, which means they're at a higher risk for potentially contracting the virus. Ms. Espinoza, the American Council of Education cited growing evidence that underserved students groups may be falling away from education. Therefore, they are canceling their pursuit of education and probably will never return because, as she stated, I really worry about those students who won't come back at all, or that they may come back much later. Even if they stay, the educational experience may be really disruptive and misaligned to their learning needs. Let's talk a little bit about these inequalities, but more specifically, how educational institutions are addressing, institutes are addressing these population, the imbalance in these population and some of the outcomes. Anyone can start.
So I guess I'll start. I think that professors have a lot of leeway here, right? Like in terms of, do you allow late assignments or not? Will you allow students to submit something in a different format? If it's an online class, will you have synchronous meetings when necessary? And I think those things can make a really big difference, especially when technology has been provided to kind of even the playing field. So as I think about the schools that I've worked at, if the students have internet and they have computers, then leniency and understanding from a professor can make a really big difference, especially with quantitative courses. So again, are you willing to have that extra Zoom meeting to explain those quantitative concepts or answer questions, providing group discussions, adding videos and other things that can help the students? What are your office hours like? Do you allow them to contact you when they're available, or is it set hours? So I think any of those things where professors have discretion can really help students if they're willing to do so.
Thank you. Dr. Kendrick?
Yeah, I agree. I just think that these are things that should be part of any professor's toolkit. If you're a good professor, you can be challenging without being difficult. And so all of these things that she mentioned are scenarios where this situation is challenging for a lot of students right now. Are we going to work with them, or are we going to work against them?
Tyler?
I mean, the one thing you brought up, like basically them returning to school, is something I think is kind of intriguing by the aspect of, I'm so sorry, everybody, is that I feel like that's always been a situation where I went to school in Mississippi. It was kind of like the blue collar university, which was people would quit, but time off would come back. And I know there's ways to overcome that, especially when it does come to minority-based groups and everything, where there might be other reasons. Like right now, especially, I know for a fact that there were students that were applying to universities, but they're like, we're going to put it off for a year or two. We're going to do a gap year, but I'm going to help my family. I'm going to stay with them, etc., which I think is a great idea. But I think people need to also put focus into the future of bringing the students. Like, how can we get these students to like get to the school? How can we give them resources in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years to recruit these students back and have them come back to the school where we can help them, and we can also applaud their efforts. You know, whether it's just a scholarship that says, you know, how did you give us a video recording of what you did during COVID to help you get here for like a non-traditional student type scholarship. I like to foresee the future, or look into the future and kind of foresee possibilities in that aspect. And I think that is something that should have a little bit more thought or be put into like the future playbook.
That's a great question. So my follow-up question would be, Dr. Broady, you mentioned that when you were at Dillard, that you received a significant amount of money. So what is your perception or your idea about grants and scholarships aiding these students as they are coming through the COVID or in the midst of the COVID, and encouraging them to continue their studies?
I think it's going to be really important because several of the presidents that I talked to said that they appreciated the CARES Act money, but that it was restrictive, that part of it was unrestricted, part was restricted. And so they mentioned things like when students left particularly Rosalind Clark artists at Benedict, that some of the students needed suitcases, right? That they may have come in the car, they may not have ever been on an airplane before. And so a few of them needed a suitcase in order to be able to go home, but there wasn't enough money for that. Or some of them needed train tickets. So I think that schools know what their students need. And so when there's government funding, if it could be less restrictive so that schools can purchase the things that they need, right? Like students at Harvard need different things than students at Stillman. I think another thing is that organizations like the UNCF can give grants that, I mean, I had been thinking about automation forever and how it was going to affect higher ed. And their grant was such that I could write that in. The Department of Energy was doing something similar. Unfortunately, we didn't get that one. But I think that organizations like that can supplement what the government is providing. And it can be more specialized based on what students need rather than a broad prescription that different schools have to try to fit into.
Thank you. Dr. Kendrick?
I think there's always going to be a need, whether it's COVID, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and the challenge is getting the funders to see the need, to realize the need, and to put it where it needs to be, but to also move expeditiously. I mean, when you think about COVID, how it occurred, there was a lot of waiting and looking around. What do we do next? You know, and there are teachers who are saying, look, here are real problems. You know, it's middle of March and we're starting to send people home. What do we do? And there were school systems like, I think Fairfax and Alexandria, who had to go and say, okay, let's do Blackboard, collaborate, let's do Zoom. And there were all kinds of problems. It's not easy to find the money all of a sudden to pay for the licenses for Zoom, where you can have more than 40 minutes of time, you know, in the Zoom call. That's a significant amount of the budget that you have to give from a school system that's now not taking in funds from having people inside of the school system in a normal scenario that the federal government has designed. And we're also going to see these problems this school year and the subsequent school years, because we're also seeing where the population of students is dropping off. Some people are opting, okay, I'll teach my kids at home, or I'll put them in private school. So in addition to having less funds, when we do get the funds, whether it be in secondary school or post-secondary, you need to get it quickly. You need to get it quickly to be able to put it to use.
Thank you. Tyler?
I literally, Dr. Kendrick said everything I was thinking. I know.
Everything?
It's good to know, Tyler, we're kindred souls.
Yeah, I was just like, I was going to say, I have nothing to contribute right now. I can tell you my favorite color, but
I hope it's yellow.
He's sunshine. Can't you tell that effervescent personality? Tyler, do you want to talk a little about the scholarship that BAU is offering to their students to offset any costs and any burdens that they may encounter?
I mean, I think that's one way that we've addressed, you know, the DC needs and everything, which is kind of, I guess I can continue off of, is that, you know, we have a variety of topics that are, you know, community-based, which was, you know, when we came out with debt-free DC, which is where we offset up to, I think, 70% of one's tuition. I don't know why that word escaped me, but it was very much like listening to like what the need was. And, you know, this was or pre-COVID, where the issue was inequalities, imbalances, and also, you know, I don't want to take out a loan. Like personally, my academic loan, I'm going to go to the grave with. That's never going away. Like, yeah, Gina, you love it. Sad, we'll cry later. But I think that, you know, that's one way that you can address stuff that is definitely like something that's stable that is going to continue through COVID into the post-COVID world. Same thing with our James Wormley Scholarship we created in response to supporting the Black community and trying to like really focus on that as a response towards the protesting and everything that was starting in spring and allowed us also to have a like, you know, we also created that by going inwards and looking at the administration, the school, everything, and what we can do to assist it. But even then, it's still the idea of COVID and everything right now. Like I believe, Dr. Broady, you brought something up about like it's always been there and things, like it just changes like names. I think it's honestly what it is. It's like some stuff comes to like, people's minds, and being able to be out there and say, we're here to help and everything, but when you have something else on your mind or anything, that's priority. So I think especially for schools where we look at, you know, we're like, no, if you're a non-traditional student or you have to take 2-3 years or come back whenever you can, we're here for you, is something that I think if I was in a situation where I have been, where I was working and trying to get through school and everything, I would, you know, appreciate. But I think at the end of the day too, it's going to be a balance of grants, scholarships, and everything. Very much a community, I think, effort.
No, I agree. Ladies and gentlemen, it is 2:51, which means we have less than 10 minutes left remaining. I have a couple of questions I will pose to the panel. So first question is from the Embassy of Costa Rica, but I believe it's pronounced Costa Rica. Shoot me later. The question is, how important is the inclusion of international students in shaping the educational experience in the U.S. higher education in the U.S. higher education programs? And will that change positively or negatively increase the availability of online programs? I know it's a lot, and I can read the question again.
Well, I think that we've already seen some changes with the current administration we have in office right now. And some of that had to be pushed back. If you recall, as soon as COVID started, it was, we're going to just push this ulterior motive to try to keep the universities open nationwide. So if you don't have any international, if you're not holding face-to-face classes, international students cannot come and take the classes. I think that was what they were initially trying to do. And they got some pushback. The President Trump got some pushback from some of the larger universities who were saying, you know, wait a minute, we can't do that. And it was all because, of course, they wanted people, his administration wanted people on campus because you fuel the economy with people having to stay in the dorms, buy food, all of that. I think that measure alone kind of turned some people the wrong way. And I can say that from experience, and because I live and teach abroad in Abu Dhabi, and people are like, hey, I don't know, Doc, if I can even get to the US if I want to now because of this scenario. And those are my colleagues and students that were looking to take higher education, postgraduate studies. And that was the situation. As far as the climate is concerned, I think that universities as a whole, whether it be in America or in other countries abroad, we're always welcoming and wanting to have international students because there's never been anything incorrect or wrong about diversity. But as someone that teaches international students, I think it is giving some pause to people's consideration of what they will do in the coming years. And it may actually hurt the US in the long run, because we're actually seeing on the international scale that numbers are in the decline, and they were before COVID-19, of people wanting to study in the US versus maybe studying abroad in China or somewhere else where they have more financial incentives.
Thank you.
I mean, I think right now completely, when it comes to learning online with international, like we want to strive to have international students. As somebody that teaches international students, I know for a fact we need them, but at the same time I think you have as I think Paolo said earlier, or I'm going to paraphrase, basically, you know, the illusion of the American dream in education or something, where people are coming here to get the jobs, get the training, learn the skills, learn the languages, and then return because they can make more money. However, the environments aren't always inclusive, or they're unaware of it. Because sometimes students just are like, they're here to do this, and they're here to work if they have the ability to, and then they're gone. But I think currently the American government has created a hostile environment. I mean, students are coming here to they're here to get anything, but then they're counting all these, like I've heard the amount of students I've heard that have had racist experiences in DC and they didn't know it. And they're like, well, why are these people saying this and stuff? But there's no ability for us to be like, well, we're sorry for that. We can give you the resources, not do it. But if you're able to have the online experience where they can just focus what they want to, which is learn this class, learn this skill, learn this degree, I think that's amazing. That's something I've been talking with other teachers and stuff. I'm like, I feel like we need to have a more intensive type of programming online for ESL students internationally, because if they're there helping and they don't have the financial ability because maybe their country's economic system is not that great, then let's try to figure out what we can do with them. Yes, we might not be getting money for the government, our government might not get money from them going to the Starbucks down the street to get coffee to come back, but we're giving them an education, having them feel that inclusiveness with the university by being abroad. That's, yeah. Because one more thing is, like, I did my master's in England, and that's how I think Britain is amazing with international students. You go in there and they make you feel like you are a part of everybody else with resources, financial, food, house, everything. They don't feel like they're just like, they're trying to trick you or catering you or being like, the freaking, like the Wizard of Oz thing where he's back there hiding, you can't really see what's happening. Like, no, they're transparent, showing you like, you are a part of this institute and we don't care the environment of the country. Like, you are here with us and it's just, I wish America could do that. I really wish.
Anything is possible.
I'm going to settle down now.
Dr. Broady, closing remarks?
I don't think I have anything to add to that one.
Yeah, Tyler Chig sometimes just wraps it all up nice.
I get carried away occasionally. I get very opinionated on certain things. And I'm like,
So can you imagine working with him? So, well, we have done it again. This topic, we could be here for another hour. We can meet every week for an hour and still probably just get to the surface or just the tip of the iceberg. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for your time, your effort, for sharing your expertise. I want to empower you to continue to do what you do so well and so great amidst the challenges of COVID and the other challenges you just may be experiencing in your in life and career. Stay focused, stay positive, stay sanitized, wear your mask. And once again, thank you. Hope to see you all soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you.